Jello and Marco.
We were just talking. Yeah, you can grab the show. Best platforms are, in my opinion, probably either YouTube or Twitch. Both the chat rooms are active on both those networks. It's also going out to Facebook, Periscope on Twitter, um, a D Live. Believe it or not, it's actually on LinkedIn. There's like about a half dozen other networks that it's associated with that it's streaming. So that regardless of the app, no matter what platform people are used to using or that they like, they can get the episode upon it. Yeah.
Cool.
So, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to do so with us tonight. I was just, we were catching up real quick before we launched into the show, talking about how I think most people typically, when they see you, it's up on stage, elevated to a place where, everyone's got a great view of you. Mark, you've played some of the biggest rooms in the city and in Canada. And legendary DJ, probably the most legendary resident DJ in Canada. How did it all start? Here in Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Scotland. That's where it really started. I played guitar at a young age. I started taking guitar lessons at 5, and and then my family moved to Canada, so I continued with guitar, classical, and then I got into jazz when I was a teenager. So I picked up the horn, sax, alto sax mainly, and yeah, I was heavily into jazz. And I collected a lot of records. My dad had a ton of records. He played clarinet in a lot of jazz. He wasn't I wouldn't say he was a great musician, but he loved music. And my mom played piano and read music and would always there was always music playing in the house. So I was brought up in a very musical environment. And then my dad's records were he had some really crazy outside jazz stuff. And then my mom was more the groovy, like sort of like Fleetwood Mac, and even when disco first came out, like my sisters and my mom were dancing around the living room doing the disco, practicing the disco steps to like Saturday Night Fever album or something, and then I was joining in because it's like it was fun.
So you were
So I think
practicing the disco steps with your mom?
yeah, and my sisters. So I think that was my first foray into dance music was that disco kind of experience. And then I mean things being in Canada, North America, I mean disco went through that crazy like boom, and then all of a sudden it sucked, and you were like
Was it
outcast.
what happened? Was it the genre that changed, the music that changed, that started to turn to something that was sucked, or was it the scene? Was it the combination of both things?
Well, I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So like, I don't know the all the politics, but the long and short of it was, I think, it just got so big, and a lot of rock radio stations, the traditional rock A&R guys, didn't really know how to handle it, and there was a big. You've probably heard about. I think it was Comiskey Park in the middle of a baseball game,
The burning of the vinyl.
burning of the disco records, and then it was disco's gay, you're gay if you listen to disco. I had a good friend who he loved the Village People. I was never like a big Village People fan, but it was everywhere. You would hear it everywhere, and he loved Village People, and he had their album. And then one day he came to school, and he was like all down and stuff, and he's like, yeah, like I was told like if I listen to Village People, I'm gay, and then he didn't want to be called a fag, and then it became like it was just so bizarre that people all of a sudden had to hide, and not admit that they liked disco, and when the day before they did. So it's sad. I mean, it's really sad that, and then that's obviously when guys like Frankie Knuckles, the disco scene went back to its roots, which was basically underground gay clubs. Um, so then in Chicago with the Warehouse, Frankie Knuckles, and then Ron Hardy were pushing this new sound, which became house music. It was like drum machines with disco, but it was essentially disco um, taken on a new level. But I'm sure like anyone who's really interested in it can read up on it. There's that great book, Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. There's a fantastic few chapters on disco.
Were you involved in that scene when Frankie Knuckles was running stuff, was coming up, the early sounds of house music? I mean,
So yeah, once
okay,
again, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So that was early '80s. I think yeah, 82, 83. I think Frankie
when did the
Knuckles.
records start happening for you? Like, when did house music first bite you?
So actually my first DJ gig was in my friend's basement. His parents were these pretty wild partiers, and they had a disco party, and they got us to DJ, and I had no idea. So I brought my parents were a little older than they were, and they were my dad was into jazz, and anyways it was a bunch of Scottish people in this basement in Scarborough, and I was like, and they'd rented DJ equipment, turntable. I'm like, whoa, like no one really DJ'd except at school dances back then. So I guess in as a teenager, no one had turntables at home. You had one turntable that was the family turntable, and you fought over what record you got to play. But no one had mixers and decks, and that hadn't really happened yet. So I brought my parents' records, and I thought, okay, well they're around the same age. I'll play these records for these people like that are in the same demographic, basically. My parents weren't there, but and so I'm playing like Wings, Mull of Kintyre, Mull of Kintyre, like thing, and they're all like, "Get this shite off, get this, we want to dance, we want to dance," and then Michael Jackson's, I guess it was Off the Wall had just come out, so that was I don't know what 84 or something.
Want to be
I
starting
can't
something?
remember. Yeah, but anyway, that album, luckily we had it, and we put it on, and we just kept playing every track on that album, and they were going nuts. Like it was a full on dance party. These middle aged, you know, I wouldn't say swingers, but maybe they were. Um, so yeah, and that was my first DJ gig. It just kind of fell into it, and then it wasn't until maybe 2 years later I was in Scotland again. I didn't really fit in Canada, so when I was 18, I'm like I'm back to the homeland. Like that's where I really feel connected to. So I was spending some time in Edinburgh. I brought my sax with me. I was doing a bit of busking,
What
trying to get a band
what
together,
was
and
it, Mark?
travel.
What was it that you felt that wasn't the fit in? What was the piece that you felt that was missing?
Um, I don't know. I think I was pretty young when we left Scotland, but I didn't want to leave my friends. I didn't know why we were coming to Canada to begin. I mean, I knew the reason. My dad got an offer to work on actually the Don Valley Parkway extension at the time. So he was a civil engineer, and so he got that gig, came over, and it was, I guess, a big part of a lot of Scottish people leave Scotland because the weather it rains a lot, and a big part of it is the weather. Like, funnily enough, and I mean, yeah, if you're into like beaches and sun, like yeah, you're gonna go to Australia or Florida or Canada, and for a lot of people, and there was more opportunity. Like you could obviously there was more of a class structure in Scotland. So if you wanted to break out of that class structure, a lot of people would emigrate. And anyway, so I didn't understand all that. I guess I was maybe too young to really see that my parents were trying to give me a better opportunity in the long run. But I was thinking short term, and I didn't fit in here. I had long hair. I mean, it's long again now, but back then it was, everyone had crew cuts, and and I wore a school uniform in Scotland, and then here, my mom was we didn't have a uniform at the first school I went to, and she still said, wear a tie. So I'm wearing a tie to school, and everyone's wearing like Levi's and like open neck, just tight t-shirts and stuff. And I'm wearing like I look like Austin Powers basically. Um, so anyway, and then speaking differently, and I just didn't fit in like any other new immigrant. You speak the language, but there's still a big culture shock, and I just it took me a long time. I don't think I ever really got over it. In high school, I pretty much, as most people do when they go to high school, I think they just force themselves to fit in to avoid, being considered an outsider. I think, and I think that's, and I did enjoy myself here in high school, but I still felt that pull back to Scotland. I felt like, that was still my home, and when I was 18, I went back there, and and I was, always heavily involved in music. And then I was in touring through Europe at the time, and I was in Greece. And so back here in Canada, it was all, if you danced disco, you know you were considered this or that, and it was all like heavy metal was like kind of the big thing at the time in the 80s here in North America. And then I'm in Greece, and I'm in this club. I'm 18. I'm on this island called Paros, and there was open air, and they were playing dance music. I don't even know what it was. It was just like probably early house music and electro and a mixture of some Italo disco probably, and I'm dancing. I'm like, everyone's dancing, and it's like, this is amazing. Like it's just like, why is this not happening um back in Canada and Toronto, right? And it was happening. It just wasn't. I didn't know where it was happening, but not with where I was.
So this is the real first bite.
That was it. And then from that point on, I went back to Edinburgh, and there were like really cool rare groove dance clubs in Edinburgh at the time, um, and that's when I first started hearing house music. So that was 1986. Um, and a lot of the early house records were coming out, and most of the records in Chicago were being made for export to the UK. It was the UK market that they were making those records for. I mean, they were making them because they enjoyed making them, but it was the UK market that funded their careers and their livelihood in order to keep making that music. So um, you know, when I later came back here, I was taking trips down to Chicago to the Mecca, and I'm like, the clubs down there weren't even really playing house music. This was late 80s, like 88, 89.
So then where were
And
the DJs that were in Chicago that were blossoming and creating this sound?
in Chicago, it was still a predominantly, it was like a gay underground scene.
So it was
Uh,
happening in the gay clubs, but it wasn't happening in any like the straight clubs or the more commercial clubs that I guess
yeah,
the
and
every
even
person
at
was going
that
to.
point, like it was probably the Music Box, and I'm not sure if Warehouse was still open. But I remember going to Chicago and Detroit on record, buying trips, and I remember being in the imports in Chicago and buying. This guy was really friendly, helping me out. I had a list, you used to make lists, um, and he had a name tag, and it was Derek with two R's. I remember, and years later, it was like, oh yeah, that guy Derek, that was Derek Carter. Like he was just working in a record shop, and we were like, he's just the nicest guy. Oh yeah, we've got this, we've got that, and like I don't think he must have been DJing, because I mean most DJs worked in record shops back then. I did here, so just to fund your records, to pay for your records and get the records before anyone else, not necessarily before anyone else did, but just to get records, you kind of had to be in the record shop every day. You know that
What?
Eastern Bloc.
Yeah, I do. I'm trying because I'm thinking to myself, what would it, what, like, how cool is that you were getting hooked up by Derek Carter in a record store? How were those selections? They're all right.
Well, I had my list. You know, you had to do your
But was
research. I mean, you
he
still
was
do.
seeding stuff though. He must have been seeding some stuff, right?
Well, no, he was like, oh, who's this guy? Like he knows his shit, you know, like, and
Ah,
he told me, you know, there were a bunch of DJs, you know, worldwide, mainly from the UK, that would go on record buying trips to New York and Chicago, and they, you know, that's where the real mark that it hadn't blown up in North America yet. So, I mean, if you wanted certain tracks, you had to go to the source to get them. And then, you know, I remember I bought Mike Dunn Magic Feet. It just come in, and I think I bought 5 copies, and I brought it back here, and I was caning it like it was. I was playing at this club called the Fourth and Fifth, Johnny K's place after Tasmanian Ballroom, and everyone was losing it to this, and it was just like maybe a 7-track EP, and it was all just loops. Like it wasn't really that was. I mean, it was a track. Well, I wouldn't say it was a song, you know what I mean? But it was a crazy ass track that blew up every sound system, and it just hit the it just hit the pulse. And I would play it, and no one else here had it, so it was like, okay. And then I had 5 copies because I knew this is going to be huge, and I gave out a couple, and then I think Eric Ling got one of them, and then it started catching on, and you could actually really break records back then just by playing at the right parties, and
do you
people would
think that
hear those.
that's not possible right now? I mean, obviously, I probably sound a little silly saying that right now, as if it's this moment. But say 2019, before the pandemic really, put us all to a halt, was is
Well, it's still possible to play unreleased tracks if you've got a friend, like say your friend Adam K. If he's making exclusive music just for you and he hasn't released it yet, and then you're playing those tracks when you play out, then yeah, it's the same thing. But back then, I mean, you had to have a record to play. There were no CDs. There was no internet. There were no downloads. So if you had a record, I mean, I used to get robbed for my records. I got robbed, I think, 4 or 5 times.
you mean
My collection, like
mugged, or
white.
like someone's broke
Like,
into your place when your back was turned?
well, I had an experience in. I mean, each
Yo,
time was
I'm
different.
sorry. You say something crazy. I mean, I want to know. I'm sure everyone else does too. It's like you were robbed. So I'm like, wait, what?
So one
I'm
time,
laughing. I shouldn't be laughing because it's fucking
well,
crazy.
Little Louis French Kiss, the record French Kiss. So it had just come out, and there was a shop on Yonge called Carnival Records. And they got 3 copies, and I was probably the only. Well, I was the only guy playing exclusively acid house and like more of the UK sound. Most DJs here were playing Chicago and New York style house, and I was playing that too. That was great too. But I was really like I was kind of the weirdo that was playing this like more like banging acid house that you know it wasn't as groovy. It was just like go for it and go mental to it. Anyway, so I got this French Kiss record in that period, and there were 3 copies that came in to Toronto, and they were warped. They were on really light vinyl. They were all warped. Like you could, do you remember those ones? It was an amazing record, but you had trouble just tracking the needle on it because it was like
I
so
had a
light.
process, Mark. I'd buy the track because I loved it, but I knew in my brain that I couldn't play it for at least 3 weeks. So I'd grab the pressing, and I had this really shitty, terrible rug that weighed like way too much. It was super heavy, and I'd put it right underneath the rug, and then I had a chair, this shitty chair that was also super heavy, and I'd put it on top of that, and I'd walk away for 3 weeks. I'd come back, that thing was flat, man. I was able to spin it.
Yeah, nice. And
Yeah.
it was still in vogue.
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, even 3 weeks, sure. I mean, like, because it wasn't like there was 1,000 tracks coming out every release day.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, people used to put them in there. They were like, put it in your oven, but just for like, 2 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah,
That's the worst idea ever, ever. Yeah, just I'm sure somehow that's worked like 10 times for 10 people around the planet, and for everyone else, it's a giant fail. I mean, like,
Even
I
wash.
couldn't imagine.
You know how they used to say, wash it with soap and water. I'm
Oh
like,
my god.
I'm not gonna get
Wi-
it wet. You know, like,
Yeah, I watched somebody Windex their records, and I was just looking at it, and I was like, I don't know what to say. So there's I do want to ask some questions. Though you said a couple things. I mean, you brought
oh wait,
yourself up.
just sorry to cut you off. Just to
No,
finish
no,
the story. So French Kiss had just come out, and I had one of 3 copies, and I had a gig that night at the Blue Note on
and it
Piers
dwarfed.
Jazz Club, and it was all the right people. It was a Wednesday night, so it was all the diehards. I played it. I actually played it twice because people were going nuts because it was the first one that had slowed down in the middle, right? It was groundbreaking, revolutionary. People were going ape. And anyway, after that gig, I played it twice, which I never really do. And we all went. It was in the summer. We went for a swim in at Bathurst and Dundas. There's an outdoor public pool. We jumped the fence. We all jumped in, had a swim, and the records were in my friend's car, like an old Honda Civic hatchback. And it's 4 in the morning. We're not thinking anything. It's like just enjoying life. It was the summer of love. It was like '88, and come out, after maybe an hour, come out of the pool, high on life, just like what the best night ever. And then the car has been broken into, and they followed us because my friend had a box of really good reggae records. It was like one of those old blue boxes, and they didn't even touch his, but they took mine. It was like, and I know it was for French Kiss. Like that's what they were after because it happened a few times. You play a track and no one could get it, and they're like the only way they could get it was to find you and steal it.
But you had 3 copies.
No, I had one of 3 that came in to town.
Oh, sorry, right. So it was the 5
Yeah,
copies in the Chicago store that you'd bought of
the Magic Feet was
right.
a story, but I think they only pressed 500 copies of a lot of those tracks just to see if they were big enough and got enough good reviews, then they would press more.
You brought up the part that when you first came to Toronto, you felt that you didn't fit in. Now you're saying as well that when you first came out to DJ, which was a question I wanted to get asked, so I'll digress real quick. Just be like, what was the first club? Was this fourth, fifth club? Was that where you started?
The
Was that
first club?
Yeah, like in Toronto when you came out and you brought out like your 4/4 sound, which you thought that stood out because you said everyone was doing more of a house thing, and you're doing more of acid. And then I think that you got it graduated to trance and progressive at one point. This was very strong for you. But before that happened, did you feel that being the outlier in the city, being the island of this sound, was this a
I
proponent
think
of
I was a
awesomeness?
bridge for the 2 sounds. I mean, there were certain tracks that crossed over, like Voodoo Ray would be one, a guy called Gerald, and every house DJ was playing that track. But as I said earlier, I mean, most DJs and it was mainly warehouse parties then, not very many clubs were playing house music. There was Twilight Zone, after hours club with no booze, but your traditional, like RPM or clubs, like commercial clubs that had bars, were not. They were playing the odd house track, but not a night of all night house music all night long. That was Twilight Zone, and then you'd get random nights popping up, like at the Diamond. There was a Wednesday with Jason Steele, Deco. Um, Sundays at Copa, Barry Harris played there for a time, and he was playing house. And there were only a few clubs that were actually playing house, but I had a couple of sounds going on. So when I came back here from Scotland, by this point I was 19, and I was playing Rare Groove because that was the sound in Edinburgh. where I'd been staying, and that was all funk, like Gil Scott Heron, The Bottle, um, all kinds of like really good rare groove and funk, jazz funk. So that was the scene, and it was more of a retro vibe, and house was bubbling, in '86 in the UK, but it hadn't blown up until '88. In '88, I was back here playing at the Tasmanian Ballroom, and I was doing my rare groove stuff on one floor, but then in the basement they had it was a dark basement with an amazing turbo sound system, and it was just like it was all about the music, and it was all about just playing deep underground house and acid house, and it was I think the lighting that we probably I think we had a strobe, and I think that was it, and maybe a fog machine, but it was dark, it was underground, and that's where I was playing acid house, and so that was the Tasmanian Ballroom.
Let me jump really fast actually to the future. I love what you've just said, and it makes me think about a lot of the early parties that I started going to. There were no laser shows. There was no LED grid that was behind the performer or screens doing projector stuff. And if there was a projector screen happening, it would be like Akira or something that would be playing in the background. It certainly wouldn't be a curated VJ that would be operating things. Would you say that all of the lights, the zips and the zaps, is this a detractor for music? Is it an enhancer? Because the parties back then, the music was enough because that would be the room, right? And then now today, for example, we go into a venue and it's, you almost have to duck and cover at some points because, a spotlight could come zooming by you. What?
You know what? It depends on the person and that person's mood. I mean, I sometimes I like it dark with no lighting, and then other times I need it when I'm in a club. It can add to the experience, and I think some music is just so minimal that some people enjoy that music taking a certain kind of substance that makes it sound differently or enhances it. So if someone's not you know doing that kind of thing in their experience, then maybe they need lights, maybe they need more flashing lights to help bring it alive more, and then some people just only need music. I think it's a very individual choice, but I think as much lighting and visuals as you have, I mean, I've seen so many places that have spent millions upon millions on the lights and the video, and the person operating has no clue. They don't know the music. They don't know when to use certain effects, and it's just kind of like, okay, turn them all on at once, and it's just like a big pinball machine. At least a pinball machine, when a ball hits something, it lights up. Like, if it's all about the operator, it's as important, if not more, than the DJ now, because the DJ should know how to program the music. So should the light guy. Like the light guy should know the music, and it's even harder for the light person because 9 times out of 10, the DJ's playing tracks that have just been downloaded that day or sent that day. So that DJ doesn't necessarily know the music. And so how's the light guy or the light person's next to the DJ supposed to know how that song goes? So you have to really think on your feet and get to know sort of the structure of most of the music.
Let's rewind 10, 15 years. You're at the record store, you're in line, there's other dudes there. It's Friday night. Do you shop, grab tracks that you think are white hot and drop them that night without knowing them? Would you deal with the unpredictability of the tracks, or were your sets more organized? Would you say that not that it was rehearsed, but you'd be like, okay, I know that I'm going here, I'm going to be playing these tracks? Would you ever go shopping and be like, fuck it, wild card, drop the wax in the middle of it?
You know what? I just remembered something when you said white hot. So I figured this because we can't do a live thing at your place.
Not tonight, but soon.
Yeah, but soon, part two. But so I figured we'd have kind of like a fireside chat. So I forgot to turn this on. I hope.
What's going on?
There we go. So yeah, and then I can melt my records like if they're warped.
Right, there you go.
Well, during these
Sure.
times, I mean, I haven't been able to turn the heat on because DJs aren't getting paid these days. So this is as good as it gets, right? I leave the door open and then get the heat coming in from the hallway. Um,
How are you doing? How are you doing with the pandemic? I mean, is this been this has got to be super weird for you. I think because no matter what, at least 2 times a week you are somewhere, entertaining, and now it's been a big brake pedal.
yeah. Okay, let's get to that. I'm going to answer your previous question first
Cool.
about going in the record shop Friday night. It was mayhem. It was like people are pushing. We've got to get to a gig. Like we need the records, and I would always listen. You're not listen. You don't have time to listen to the whole record, but you would know certain producers to watch out for, certain labels. So you'd go in and because I was in there a lot, I was pretty, I would think, a good customer, spending a lot of money, and they knew I was coming in to buy. I wasn't just in there to kind of listen and fart about on a Friday night. So I'd come in and they'd have a box usually for me, and I'd go through them all, and then you'd get guys like trying to push you aside because they want to get in, and you had to kind of just like stand your ground sometimes, just to try and listen, and it got kind of rough in some of those
It
shops.
did.
Yeah, and then you'd get the other guys, that were maybe a bit lazier, and they'd come in and they'd be like, "Oh, there's Mark in the back," and they'd come and they'd kind of look over. You'd feel someone behind you,
Are you
and
gonna
there'd
are you
be a
gonna
guy
take that, bro?
just
Are
like
you gonna take
looking.
that one? Are you gonna take that?
Yeah, yeah, and then they'd be like, "Oh, is that one good? Well, what's hot? What's hot?" Like, I'm like, "Fuck it, like back off, get your own sandwich." And so yeah, I mean, I would come out with a bag or a box of records and go straight to a gig, and just I would just risk it. I mean, I'd be like, okay, let's say it was late '80s and it was Todd Terry. Everything he touched, they called it the hand of Todd. Like, Maradona was the hand of God around that time, and then Todd Terry was the acid house God. So anything that said Todd Terry on it, you would just grab and yeah, okay, I'm gonna. It might sound weird at first listen, but in the shop, but then you get it in the club and it's like, whoa, this is like incredible. So I mean, you just kind of, yeah. I think actually Don, our good old friend Don Burns, um, he was being interviewed one time and he's like, yeah, like Mark showed up one night with a bag of records and just dropped it, and he was like, and to me that was just what you would do. Like you always wanted to share that joy of finding a new track, and I always thought that music it taken probably a week to get here to the record shop, and then it wasn't on radio or anything, so that you had a duty to play that for everyone at the party. You had a responsibility. You were kind of a vessel for that music to get through to the crowd. So I don't want to get too philosophical, but it was exciting. You go out and buy something, you want to, say you buy a new car, like you want to go out and drive it that night. You know what I mean? And that was the same with the music. So that was going back to answer that first question. But yeah, your next question about the pandemic. I mean, last year, luckily I played over 250. I was thinking the other day trying to do the math, and I played over 250 gigs last year. So thankfully I had that. Thankfully I had that year that I had, and in some ways, um, for me, everyone's different. I mean, this has hit everyone differently. The first 2 months, I was like I haven't had a real break in 30 years or longer. It's just been go, go, go. Maybe a couple of days here, a couple of days there, but always DJing on a weekend.
And holidays.
Um, it might, it wasn't like, I'm working in a factory or an office, like the same spot. I might be in Ibiza or, Hong Kong. So it's
Right.
obviously a fun job, but at the same time, there was never any time to just sit and chill properly. And that's what I kind of had a bit of time to do, I guess. Not the first month of the lockdown because I had to scramble to try and figure out, how I was going to pay for everything and sort out all the finances and stuff. But then I kind of, was taking long walks. I did have a bit of time, and it was nice. But and then I got a few gigs. There were in the summer, towards the end of the summer, there were a couple of outdoor spots that I've been playing at over the last few years, and that was great to be out and play and not be too stressed, like running. The summer before I'd been going, 2 gigs in one night, like racing. And one ended at 10. It was a daytime thing, and the other one began at 10. So I'd have to get from Yorkville down to basically the Skydome or whatever it's called now. I still call it Skydome.
Rogers
And I'd have,
Center.
yeah, Rogers, and well, that's a shameless plug there, Jello.
they're not.
Uh,
They're not paying.
I'm gonna pull out my bell bill and hold it up. So yeah, I mean, it was, you're just kind of going, and it's a fun, if you want to call it a job. I don't really think of it as a job, but it's physically demanding. The hours and trying to eat properly and be healthy and so I guess I was able to sort of take things a bit slower at the beginning of the lockdown, and then I'm back into playing a couple of gigs, which was nice because you've got all this music and new music, and then where do I play it? It's kind of it's great to play it at home for yourself or for your friends, but I'm not a live stream kind of DJ. I mean, I did one at one club, and I played an old school vinyl set, but it's not. I don't showboat, like I'm not jumping around and dancing. So for me, it's just all about the music, and I find that's not entertaining for people to watch me just playing, you know. And also I play, usually long sets,
Mark,
so no
opinions
one's going to be
probably
tuning in
vary. Because
9 hours.
you're playing all the time, man. People, I think people love to see you, even if you're not, have a physicality or a presence where you're, you know, doing a zip and
Well,
zap.
one of my typical sets. I mean, you could watch a box set in that length of time. So I mean, what would you rather watch, like season one of Sopranos or Mark Oliver DJing for 9 hours? I mean, I know I would.
I mean,
So
I see what you're saying. I see what you're
for
saying.
me, for me to DJ, you should. It's always been about the communal experience and being in a club, and it's sharing it with other people and dancing. And I'm not saying live streams are bad. I'm just saying it's just not. It's not me. I'm not. Maybe I'm just too shy. I don't know. But yeah. So what were we saying? Oh yeah, but now, so the second lockdown. I mean, this is the first time I've been. I'm not even playing music, but this is the first kind of gig, I guess, if you want to call it, I've had in 2 months, and it's
Cheers.
been yeah. Cheers. So yeah, I don't really know. Now I'm in a new kind of phase where I'm just kind of, it's kind of really hitting me. Obviously things have to come back, but we're still wondering when. And I mean, there's a lot of hope, um, but a lot of people I'm talking to, I mean, it's not a good situation, and I'm trying to be upbeat. Um, I'm trying to be positive, and I think there's no other way really. Or if you if you're not thinking positively now, it's time to maybe start or get some help, because I think that's all we can do now.
Would you
And one
say
day,
that? Would you say that throughout the amount of time that you've been watching electronic music grow into what it's become today, how many times was there a start and a stop? Like, for example, like the latest keyword, I guess, that was used en masse was EDM, which is an acronym. And before EDM, what was before EDM? Was it just rave? And then before that, was it electronica? And before that, was it IDM? There has been so many. I feel like, and even techno at one point had a, new wave wasn't called new wave until new wave kind of concluded. I'm just
yeah,
saying.
a
I
lot
think
of that was, there were so many music magazines, print magazines, and in the UK alone, there were probably 3 DJ mags that were coming out weekly. You had Mix Mag DJ, and then there was another one I can't remember, but and then there was one in Scotland, and those magazines have to fill pages, and I think maybe not every week there was a new genre or subgenre, but at least every month or 2 months there'd be okay, this is the hot new thing. I remember when acid house was like blowing up, and it was revolutionary. It was you could tell it was going to be bigger than punk rock, and within a few months, then there was this thing. There was like, oh, now it's new beat. New beat's the new thing, and it was from Belgium, and I'm like, I'm listening to new beat. I had a couple of new beat records, and yeah, there were some good tracks there, but it was like, it wasn't acid. There were similar elements, but it was kind of like, I think a lot of people, for whatever reasons, want to push the next big thing. And it's like, look at rock and roll. I mean, there's so many different types of rock over the years, and there still are. But essentially, and you look at house music, it's stemmed from disco. It's always been 4 on the floor. And then, there have been other genres that have, blossomed out of it. Trance's roots, I would say, are in, house music and techno. But, the Belleville, is it the 3? The Belleville 3, the techno, Derek May, and the guys, I'm so bad with my history right now.
it doesn't seem that way. Derek May, Juan Atkins, Kevin Saunderson.
Yeah, Kevin Saunderson. And so, I mean, they put out an album in the UK called Techno or something, and they didn't even like the name techno, and it was their music. So that was being named, as the next big thing, like this is different from house music. And when you look how close Chicago and Detroit are, and I used to drive to Detroit, buy records, then drive to Chicago and buy more records, then come back. It was like the scenes were very close. It was like, Toronto, Ottawa,
Montreal, right?
So like they're all interconnected, and it was a lot of the same, equipment being used, and everyone, I think, was influenced by Ron Hardy as far as the DJing goes. So, what am I trying to say? Yeah, I mean, there's always been
it's
like
good storytelling. Where you're going?
There are different names, all these different genres all coming out all the time, and at the end of the day, like some people, I would hate to quote Billy Joel, because I'm not really a big fan of Billy Joel, but that song, "It's Still Rock and Roll to Me." Everybody's talking about the new sound funny, but it's like, it's all rock and roll when you look at it. At the end of the day, it's the blanket term, and that's basically what EDM is to me. It's a blanket
house music.
But the true house heads, the chin strokers, will say house is not EDM. Like, I remember playing this gig in Ibiza, and they're like, "Don't play any EDM." I'm like, I'm not. But they meant, they didn't want to hear pop commercial stuff. So instead of saying, back in the day, it would have been, "Don't play any vocals or any poppy house." Now it's like, "Don't play EDM," because it's like basically radio stuff. And I get it. It's like people need to have if they like a particular style or a particular anything, food, you know, you have to be more descriptive, and that's why all these genres, you know, spring up.
Throw us back real quick. I'm curious. You were the government's main resident DJ. You rocked the main room more times than any other performer. When did that start? Did you start in that big room as a guest? You were brought in a couple of times, and then that behaved like an audition, and then they were like, "Yo, you're it," or was it you were brought on? Your reputation at that point was already strong enough, and everyone felt that was behind the scenes that you could command the room and work it.
Well, back then you had to pay to play, so I would give them $1,000 a week, and then I'd go in and play, and like no one else could come close to. No, okay. So I first played at RPM when it was actually going back to Jason Steele Deco. He did a techno night and I looked this up a few weeks ago, and it was January 25th, I think, 1992, and then the government closed exactly 23 years later. So the first time I played, it was RPM back there, and I wouldn't even compare. People are always like, "Oh yeah, government, that's RPM," and I'm like, "No, government was government. RPM was RPM. They were completely different. You were probably RPM. There was a big bar in the middle of where the government dance floor was, and it was a really big bar, and there was obviously a dance floor. The dance floor had a railing around it and a stage, and it was, you know, more of a. I would say there were just as many concerts as there were, you know, DJ nights, and you know the dance nights were amazing. Don't get me wrong, but they weren't. The club itself was, they didn't have a wooden floor for one, which was put in for the phase-on sound system. So the sound system for government was really the big seller. I think the very first flyer for the very first night, it was with Danny Tenaglia, and it was digitally or digital sound system, because digital in 1996 was the big thing. Oh, it's digital, it's digital. You know, it's like so, and it was actually we were still playing records, but it was you know, a digital crossover. Like there was a digital unit in the rack, you know, full of all this other analog equipment. Right? So, but digital was, you know, dangling on it. So what happened is the first summer, RPM had run its course, closed. Then Charles took over the building with his partners, and they opened that summer. They did a bang up job. You know, Charles was always really big into design, and he brought a few elements from still life, which had, I don't know what the capacity of still life was, but let's say 500. And then and it was an exclusive club, so not everyone got in. You know, a lot of it was based on how you looked, how you dressed. So it was very elitist in that regard. And I think government originally, I think Charles wanted that type of like a bigger still life, and there was a strict dress code. And that first summer, most of the cars that were driving by, it hadn't been advertised yet. They were still sort of feeling their way around to see if they could get away with that. But you know what? A club the size of government, you couldn't get away with having 200 people in there and being exclusive. Maybe if you were in New York, you would have the population to be able to do that. But Toronto, there just wasn't. We didn't have the numbers in 1996 to be able to do that. So that didn't work. That original plan. I wasn't playing there at that point. It was. I think JC had played there, and I'm pretty sure it was guys that had worked for Charles at Still Life. So they were playing a mixture of styles of music, like a lot of old school disco and house music, but it wasn't like house music all night long, like a Twilight Zone or the raves. So at that time, I was playing raves every weekend, and we were probably playing them together. Um, and then, I'd been doing the raves for a few years, and I was kind of sometimes it'd be annoying. You'd show up to this warehouse, and the sound system had broken down. You'd have an amazing crowd, and then there was some kind of failure. There were no toilets, or the cops would come and raid it and shut you down, so you wouldn't get to play. And anyway, I was Charles approached me towards the end of that summer, because a few people that were working for him, mainly Albert Soon, were saying, I guess he was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this? He'd built this beautiful club, and he had this amazing sound system that was on its way. It was being built in New York that summer. Even the console was being, hand carved in New York and then shipped up. And so anyway, and the Steve Dash Phazon system, I mean, they had one at Twilo and then Cream in Liverpool. So there were only a handful of clubs worldwide that had this sound system, and it was a huge deal. But anyway, a few people, I guess, had told Charles, get Mark, like he'll do it. And I had a name for myself. I had a really popular night at Cameron House. That was on the Acid Jazz
Wednesday
tip.
nights.
Yeah. And Charles knew me. I'd played at Still Life. There was a gay night on Mondays for a while. I remember Madonna showed up one night, and so I did that briefly, and then I moved over to Gogo across the road. So I could do the commercial club, and still, I knew when I could take it harder and get away with it, and when I had to kind of keep the owners happy, because they'd want to see people spending money at the bar or whatever. So
this is a skill unto itself. This is its own thing. That is a skill. That is a DJ skill.
Well, without selling out, like it was a really tough thing to do. And anyway, the programming was key. So I guess at that point, Buzz was going at which then became Comfort Zone, and I'd been playing there, and then Industry was just opening, and they'd offered me a residency at Industry, which I turned down. That was a long story, but we can talk about that another time. And then I guess 2 weeks after I turned down Industry, I got a call from Charles, and he wanted to have lunch. And we'd never really sat down for any extended period. We knew each other's names and reputation, but we'd never actually, had a full-on conversation. So we had a meeting in Yorkville at the Bel Air, I think he owned at the time. We had lunch, and he was, he had a lot of questions for me. Like he was a bit, it's such a big place, and he'd spent so much money, and it was a bit of a risk for him bringing me on, because, here I have this reputation as, this underground DJ, and, playing raves every weekend. And my idea was, okay, there's a rave crowd. The rave scene had been going strong for maybe 4 or 5 years by this point in Toronto. And I knew that there was an older crowd at the raves that were not really into being there with younger people, underage. And so there was this whole group, and I knew that they would come if I were playing somewhere that had a bar and had, proper bathrooms and, just a
sound system that wouldn't break down.
A good sound system, good lights, just like, so that basically is what happened. I mean, the older rave crowd came, and at the end of that summer, I actually took a week off, which I had never done in my whole DJ career. I'd been DJing for 10 years by that point, and I'd never taken a weekend off. And then I was, my girlfriend at the time was like, she had a place in Florida. She's like, let's go. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we went away, just so I could get myself, because I knew this was the big one. This was a big deal.
Was that your first meeting that was like a true, like it wasn't lifestyle. It was this is not even just a gig. It's a job for
No, it
DJing.
was
That is. I mean, like I'm not saying about like part-time jobs or another job, a full-time job that you can. I'm saying it's specific to Mark Oliver as a brand, as a performer. When you went, you took that meeting at that lunch. Were you super nervous? You didn't know Charles that well, so you're sitting down. Did you know what the meeting was about before you sat down?
no, I knew. Yeah, I knew. That's what he wanted to talk about.
So were you super nervous at that? Were you like holy shit, like
No, no, I was on. I was. I mean, I've never thought of myself as having a big ego, but I think looking back, I probably was pretty cocky. You know, I was on top of the world. I was at least in Toronto. I was, you know, headlining raves every weekend. I had a club in Ottawa that would, you know, they'd fly me there every week, and not every week, sorry, every month. Um, you know, I was traveling around. I was playing across the country and in Europe and Mexico, and the scene, you know, hadn't really exploded in a lot of countries. So I was, you know, I was going to places that, you know, the scenes were just still pretty small and bubbling, but you know, I had, you know, and there was no internet either, so it was just kind of like word of mouth, or someone got your phone number. You had so to build up that kind of reputation was a lot different back then. But I, you know, I had it. I knew I was in demand, and I knew I could do it. I played at Club Max for a year, and I saw their numbers within 2 weeks. I was doing Headley Jones had his CF&Y night on all night, and I would play before him, and then I would stay on and play a bit of his show with him, and we had a really good ticket going. So I knew exactly what to do, and I knew that I could do it. So I was completely confident
did
and
did this
excited. I wasn't nervous at all. I think Charles was nervous because he's like, who? Because he didn't know me. I didn't know him either, but I knew the venue. Like I knew it when it was RPM. We had a couple of raves there, and I knew the sound, and I had the crowd, but I knew I would just have to blow a whistle and they'd be there.
did this
So
did this change the way that you were grabbing music? I mean, you brought up how the record shopping experience was before this, but now you're rolling into the shops. Did you find that the treatment from the shop owners, the employees, did that change towards you? You already said you had a collection of stuff, a stack to be put aside, that was favorited for you. But now you're walking into the store. You've got all this responsibility as a massive resident DJ in one of the biggest cities here in North America, and also at a time when Toronto was really starting to bubble up. It was doing this ascension thing that was happening. You could really feel it in the city that electronic dance music was it was right. So now you're going into the stores. You were Mark Oliver before, that was cool. Now you're like Mark Oliver extra. How are you, like what how did that change your music? Like did it change your music habit? Did it change how you did your quest?
no, I mean, I've never thought of myself that way. You know, it doesn't matter where I'm playing. Like I could be playing for 5 people or 5,000, 50,000. It's all the same. Obviously, you get more of a rush if there's 50,000 in front of you, but um,
If
it
they're
doesn't.
dancing.
It's never going to my head. Like I'm kind of a bit awkward. I think when I'm on those big stages because I'm not jumping up on the table and head banging and like I know that there's a place for that. It's just not me. And so I mean, I actually liked Government in the first 10 years. The DJ booth was up kind of high, almost on. It was basically on another level, and it wasn't the forefront. It wasn't on stage, front and center. It was, but that sound system was incredible, and the speakers I had, the monitors and the DJ booth were set up perfectly to perfectly match the sound on the floor. And I'm hauling my own records, and I'm not like there was a guy playing in the orange room, which was the smaller room in that club, and I remember I had to go outside one night. I had to run out to the car or something, and you had to get back before the record ran out. Anyway, and there's this guy like standing in the parking lot with a towel around his neck, and headphones on, and he's like practically, signing autographs. And I'm like, who's that guy? Like, and then someone's like, oh yeah, he's like out there, telling everyone he's the government DJ, and like he was, the club's packed inside, like he's not even playing. It's like, I get what you're saying. I mean, but I never thought about. To be honest, all I could think about was getting the music, getting to the, and I was a single dad most of that time too. So, I mean, I was all week, looking after the kids, and then, trying to get the records, and then doing the reviews, because in order to get promos, you'd have to keep up with reviews and like fax reviews. Yeah, like old fax machines, and like, and make connections at the record shops just to make sure you got. But I know on the other side of that coin, like that people did start treating me differently, which was, I found, quite hurtful. I noticed when I'd be in the record shop, it'd be, a lot of the other DJs would be like, you could almost hear them behind your back. Sometimes I could hear them, just like, because there was a lot of jealousy, and in the beginning, you're coming from a rave environment where everyone got like, say, an hour and a half set, more like the festival type DJ set these days. And then, and I'd been DJing longer than any of the rave DJs in town. I mean, I was throwing the first raves with Exodus. So I think I'd paid my dues. But before that, I was a club DJ playing at Tasmanian Ballroom, like open to close. And that was just always the way I worked. So even at a rave, sometimes I'd be like, oh, I wish I could be playing the whole night, but obviously you can't. And then I think with Guvernment, because it was essentially a rave in a club, it was basically a rave club. People were dressed a bit differently because they had to get in. They still had a dress code, so it was almost like, you'd get your collared shirt or something with a t-shirt underneath, and then once you got in the club, you whip the collared shirt off and just and
let loose.
Yeah. So I mean, I think for me to go from, a lot of DJs figured, okay, like we're all gonna play at Guvernment together as one big happy family, which we kind of had been in the rave scene, I think. But I knew that I'd been asked personally to play there, and no one else had been, so I couldn't share it with anyone. It was kind of like, I've been given a job, and it's a big undertaking and a big responsibility, and I was obviously picked for whatever reasons, and I felt like I just kind of had to run that race on my own. It wasn't a relay race, and for that, I think a lot of local DJs felt, I could see them on the balcony the first few months, and they're all just waiting for me to fuck up, like, oh, he's gonna, like, I think I got my drink spiked a couple of times, and like, like, but yeah, no, I was like determined, I was like, this is, if this is this is a big chance, it's a big, but in some ways, I had to be, I'm not going to say I sold out, but sometimes I couldn't play that really underground record that I got that week, and I was dying to play. And if I'd been playing in another venue, I would have played it within a heartbeat. But at Guvernment, I would have to wait until 4 a.m. Once I could see all the bars had made all their money, and the crowd, it was all having a great time, then I could get a bit more experimental. But
I brought up the start and stop of for example, because right now we're in a, I guess, a full stop, but I don't know how else to describe it. Back in 2001, the city of Toronto, it felt like actually a lot of North America really started clamping down on raves. It was during this time, this clampdown, that two things happened. One, the rave scene did get together and rallied, created a one-off event called iDance. That actually had a sequel because this kind of shutdown, this clampdown on raves that happened in 2001 was still ongoing in 2002. There were two iDances. This is right, yes?
yeah, I missed both of them.
When that happened, though, that shutdown I felt during that time, this was a big translating moment when raves seemingly stopped, at least a lot of the big ones, and the clubs really started up. So it felt like RPM and Gov up, system soundbar up, industry up, and then when all that was done, people would crowd into comfort zone. It felt like this was the move that happened, and then I felt that was until 2008, 2009, the party started coming back. You were doing both. You at that point when they came back, you would do Gov, and then we'd still also see you somewhere else as well. So what I guess what I'm asking is that this is an instance if I can think of a stop that happened, but when that stop happened, you didn't stop because you had already gone and moved into the clubs. I'm thinking to myself how during this time, for example, that's not the thing, and that's why I was asking you earlier how that was feeling for you. Um, the reflection that you're going through right now that you brought up is super awesome, and again, as I said in the start of this interview, it's awesome to see you in this environment. Most people, myself included, like I said, we're used to looking up in the booth when the booth was high up in Gov, and then again when it translated down onto the mid-level stage, we were still looking up. We don't get to see
I'm
Mark in
glad you
front
were
of
on the
us.
floor dancing, Josh, because you weren't one of the guys like throwing darts at me from the balcony.
No, you're right. I wasn't, and fuck yeah, it's time to dance, especially if you're in the venue, right? What's the old school expression? If you haven't come to dance, then what the fuck have you come for?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm I'm really happy that you were able to share all this stuff with us tonight, taking the time to do it. Uh, I want to talk to you all night long.
What
I
time is it?
it's actually we've been going at it for over an hour. I'm not here to stop it either. I've actually got
Oh, I was just gonna get into all the juicy stuff.
yeah, yes, which is good because
Kinda like
I
stuff
wanted to ask,
to show off.
on a more like whoa level, and of course keeping things in
I
mind
was
that we
gonna give you a
can't.
tour of my boudoir and shit.
50 Shades of Mark. What
Cribs,
what would you say
cribs
is the
with Jack.
party for you that stands out? What was the one time that when you got off, you felt higher than a cloud? What was that party? And what and
Um,
what and what the fuck was going on that made it that way? Besides obviously that you were awesome, the music was awesome, everybody was interactive.
okay, I can't. Sorry, I can't give you one. It's just
Give us two.
there have been so many. There have been so many. Each has been awesome in its own way. There have been a lot of bad experiences too. Don't get me wrong.
Why,
Um,
why why talk about those? I'd rather hear the great stuff.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I can't really think right now.
Would it
Sorry.
be at Gov? Would you say that your nights, that the most memorable nights that you had were at Gov? And what about now? Like, I mean, before the pandemic stopped everything, at the new venue as well. Now that are you where were you playing predominantly before the pandemic stopped everything?
You know what? I would have to say, you know, just today, tomorrow, I could have a different answer for you, but I think looking back, so in 88, I was playing, acid house. I was playing techno and just trying to get a scene going here. And there were the first rave I threw. There were 3 people that showed up, and there was, a big ad in Now magazine, which is where you would advertise back then. So people, there was just no one here. There was no one here that was into it. And then I was like, this isn't gonna. I kept trying and trying, and nothing would click. And then I was like, you know what? By the time this happens, I'll have moved on to something else. So it was a good 3 years until in '91, when Exodus started, and that's when I'd been playing for a year at Gogo, and then left Gogo and started playing at 318, and it just kind of happened where this group of guys came in from Brampton. Their friend told me they were a touring football team from Scotland. That's how I got them in on the guest list. That was how they blagged. But anyway, they showed up, and that night there were probably 24 of them, and then the following week 50, and then they shut 2-3 hop down. So we got some money together, and we rented it every week and through Exodus raves. And I think most people would agree those were the first raves. So I think probably it must have been probably the first official Exodus rave where we had a flyer and we had all the elements that you would have at a rave. To see that happen after not giving up hope, but starting to scratch my head and wonder if it was ever going to happen here. I think that would probably have to go down as the most memorable, just because of the significance of it. And obviously, 19 years at Guvernment, there were a lot of great nights in there too. That obviously, I would come home just wondering like if that was even real.
What about the gift?
The gift, yeah, I mean the gift nights were always really fun because you would play classics, and everyone loves. I love hearing classics. I don't want to hear them every week, but because I was always pushing new music every week, there were a lot of people that they wanted to hear the old ones, the golden oldies or whatever, right? So the gift happened once a year, and it was always it was special because it was a reunion. You have a club that's open for 19 years. A lot of people move on after every couple of years. You get a bit of a changeover, so it was like, it was a very special nights at the gift. Yeah, a lot of work though, digging through, pulling out all the records. I don't think people realize the work that we do sometimes.
I can only imagine what your record room looks like. I've not seen it. I have spoken to a few people who have, and they have said like,
yeah, well, we could spend an hour with stories on the.
How many pieces of wax are you sitting on, Mark?
Well, none right now, but so I have 40,000.
What?
Plus. The last count was just over 40. Yeah. And I have maybe 5 or 6 here in my living room. But
is there a number of tracks? Do you have tracks that just they stay in your bag with something that you would call timeless, regardless of the gift on throwback sessions you'd have, or if they were brand new? Do you have go-to records that you're like, this is gonna start the fucking party no matter what?
Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's different if you've got a drive and you've got 40,000 tracks. You can organize them into playlists and they're all on your laptop or whatever, right? But to have physical records, I mean, you can't bring them all.
Do you still deal with vinyl exclusively when you're playing? Have you moved to digital?
No, I played my last set at Coda. I played 2 sessions. So the first half was vinyl, and then second was digital. And then actually, when you think of it, this year because of the lockdown, I've probably played more vinyl sets than digital. But normally I would only play maybe 2 or 3 a year. And
digital is a CD and now USB. Like you did the translated move on the gear that you're using.
My laptop, unless it's maybe say a lounge gig or something, or somewhere that doesn't have CDJs, and they can't rent them, or if they don't have the space. I remember there was the first time I used Tractor was in Barbados at the Cliff, and they had just such a tiny spot for me to play in. It was spectacular. That was an amazing time at the Cliff, Barbados. So yeah, I mean, it all depends on what I can play. Whatever equipment is there, I'll try and use it. But typically, if I had my way, I would have all my records with me all the time. I even joked about it a couple of weeks ago, just having an RV, or actually it'd have to be bigger than that, but just and just tour around with all of my records and just, you know, you could be playing and then you're like, oh yeah, I want to play that, and like run out and grab, because you can't physically bring that many records into a gig. It's just and Government, no one ever helped me. I was always carrying them on my own. By the time I was tired, and then I'd have to play 9 hours. I'm like, and then haul them back home at the end of it all. So yeah, I mean that physical side of it was, I mean, that was my only workout for years.
Looking back after everything that's happened, would you say that there's something that you would have done differently?
I would have said no to this interview, to this session. Um,
You're stuck now, Mark.
because I've just been talking the hind legs off a donkey. But
It's been amazing. I know that you're being funny, but I mean, like I said, man, no one. I don't know about any of this that's with Mark Oliver that people can just grab online. The insight here is
no,
awesome.
I don't have any regrets. I mean, we all make mistakes in life, and I'm not going to say I haven't made a few along the way, but here we are. We're all healthy. Hope everyone else out there is healthy and staying safe. And at the end of the day, I mean, as long as we have music and friends and family that are enjoying life and looking after each other, like, you really can't ask for any more than that.
Well, I know that me and tens of thousands of people in the city are excited for stuff to open back up again, where we could all look up and see you rocking it.
Well, I think next year is going to be a great one in a couple of weeks, and I think we'll probably have to go back to a lot of the outdoor stuff, which is fine by me as long as the weather cooperates.
We're going towards spring, so
Yeah, I mean, we're you know what, we've seen it all over the years, and we know that things can go up and down in this scene, and I think we'll rise above it all.
looking forward to it. My name is Jello, and with me is the legendary Mark Oliver, right here on Utility Room. Mark, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
All
for
right. You are amazing. Thank you, my brother. Take care. Everybody else, have an awesome night. Thanks a lot for watching.